Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 101 of the Talking Friars podcast. It's kind of weird to say an episode over 100. Been in the double digits for a while, but we're in the triple digits in episodes now. I'm Ben Fadden, your host. Today, we will be talking about, to start off your week, a very interesting and fun episode, I think, about a hypothetical possible situation that I proposed on gaslampball.com on Sunday, about if you could undo one AJ Preller Padres trade that he has made in his tenure as Padres GM, which one would you pick? And this is an interesting question, I think, and I hope that you guys do as well and have fun debating with me and with friends and with other people about, if you had one trade, which would you undo if you had the power to do so? Because Preller has had some good trades. Fernando Tatis Jr. is obviously at the top, and that will be probably near the top of things that we're going to remember AJ Preller for, because of hopefully how great of a Hall of Fame career Fernando is going to have, and hopefully he has a statue at Petco and all that. Preller brought him here, so that's definitely a moment. Acquiring Joe Musgrove is another moment. You know, he gave up Joey Lucchesi, who didn't really have a role here, and gave up a few prospects that might end up being something, but Joe Musgrove might end up having his number retired. I mean, I would. Him and Jake Peavy, when all things are said and done with their Padre careers, obviously threw the first no-hitter in Padres history, which is probably the best moment I've had ever as a Padres fan, ever since I've been alive. Acquiring Jake Cronenworth is another good trade. You know, I know Tommy Pham didn't really work out, and that's the reason why they really acquired Cronenworth. It seemed like a throw-in, but if they keep Cronenworth, I know there's all these dumb Twitter rumors and all that about trading Jake Cronenworth. That would be the dumbest thing ever. That would be stupid, just because of the contract and how many more years of control they have, not even mentioning that he's their third best hitter, going to hit in the middle of the lineup. He's versatile, can play first, second, short, probably can play third. He pitched at one point in the minor leagues and pitched at one point in 2021 for the Padres in that long extra inning game against the Dodgers at Petco Park earlier in the year. But that's kind of going off on a different tangent. But so acquiring Tatis, Musgrove, Cronenworth, Grisham seems to work pretty good. There's been some good moves, but it seems like there's been more duds in the Preller tenure than there have been really good moves. And some of them, I'll mention some honorable mentions that I did think about, and I'm sure these trades will come up and be selected by some fans about if they had the opportunity to undo one Preller trade, what would it be? They'd pick some of these. They'd pick one of these that I'll mention, and then at the end I will get to my pick. And I'm not so sure it'll be the popular pick. Maybe it will be, but I don't think it will be. So just because of the names, to be quite honest. But let's get to the honorable mentions. We'll go from the earliest of Preller's tenure, some of the honorable mentions, to most recent honorable mentions that I did not select, but those are definitely options and I think probably will be selected. So the 2014-2015 offseason, one of his bad trades, trading Yasmani Grandal to the Dodgers in the Matt Kemp deal. Obviously, this was the start of the rock star GM that Matt Kemp, coined that phrase of Preller. That ended up not really working out well at all in terms of that batch of trades that were made. Kemp ended up, being traded to the Braves after less than 2 seasons with the Padres, and he ended up calling the Padres and San Diego not a real baseball town, or I don't know if he called them, I forget if he called them that in his statement, but he was saying that he was excited to go into Atlanta because it was a real baseball city or baseball town. And that was really disrespectful to Padre fans, to us, because we love our baseball, we love our Padres. It's not our fault that we haven't won a World Series. We're fans of the team, we're passionate about the team. And I think you can see that, especially now that the team is getting better and they have players on the team that actually want to be there and love being there. They support the team. So I definitely am not a fan of Matt Kemp. I know a lot of people aren't. And that was one of the worst trades Preller has made. That was an honorable mention. Grandal, I'm not so sure he'd be the starting catcher right now because his contract would have been up. But his WAR with the Dodgers after he was traded from the Padres was 10.4, his total WAR. Kemp's total WAR with the Padres, 0.7. So that is a huge gap, as you could tell. And that really illustrates how bad of a trade that was. I understand what Preller was getting at. Doing it, obviously, he was going all in. And I definitely applaud him for doing that. I didn't have a podcast at the time, but I'm pretty sure I was applauding him for doing that at that time that he did it. It made the Padres, they won the offseason, right? And I'll talk about some more of these honorable mention trades that are included in the offseason that Preller did there in 2014, 2015 offseason. But looking back on it, it was dumb because of the players he gave up, acquiring veterans that it didn't seem like, from what I've heard, didn't really get along. Derek Norris is one of those guys that seemed like they didn't really get along with teammates there in that clubhouse. But it's nothing against, I want to make it clear as well, it's nothing against Matt Kemp, like as a human being. I just didn't like what he said in the statement about San Diego, or not saying about San Diego, if you want to put it that way. And speaking to, I spoke to Tyson Ross about this on a recent podcast episode, which you can go listen to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watch on YouTube. And I asked Tyson, former Padre, he was in the locker room with Matt Kemp, what was he like as a teammate? What is he like behind the scenes? And he said that Matt Kemp works. He helps younger players out. He's a family man. So it's nothing against Matt Kemp as a person. But the trade, in terms of just baseball terms, did not work out. And I didn't like the way that he left. So that's an honorable mention for being one of the worst Preller trades that he's made. If there was one trade you could undo, that's an honorable mention. 2014, 2015 offseason, we continue. And this one involves the three-way deal with the Rays, Nationals, and of course the Padres. Trading Trey Turner to the Washington Nationals in that Will Myers three-way deal trade. Trey Turner, he was a prospect for the Padres, wasn't really regarded as like a top prospect the way that Tatis was coming up, but he was still, I think, a good prospect. This one definitely hurts. It was an honorable mention. I'll discuss more about my reasoning, why it's not my number one. If I could undo a trade, it would be this Trey Turner trade. I'm not saying that it is, but I'll explain more why I didn't pick that. I didn't pick that one. Excuse me. But just to kind of go through, the Trey Turner trade really obviously didn't work out well in terms of Trey Turner. He goes on to the Washington Nationals. He's one of the best shortstops in the league now. His Washington Nationals total WAR was 22.3. And currently, I probably should have included the WAR that he had with the Dodgers and what he will have this year, because he's not a free agent until after, I believe, this coming season. That was something that was appealing for the Dodgers in that trade that they acquired him. But just with Washington, his WAR was 22.3. That's a lot of wins that he could help the Padres with. Myers' San Diego WAR so far, he still has one more year left, 11.1. So Trey Turner doubled Will Myers' WAR in Washington compared to Myers in San Diego. Part of this reason, I guess I can explain why it's not my number one trade that I'd undo, is because while Trey Turner is a great player, that trade isn't as bad now looking back on it, not because of the trade itself, but because the Padres, Preller kind of redeemed himself getting Jake Cronenworth at second and then Fernando Tatis Jr. at short, and having CJ Abrams come up and possibly playing middle infield, depending on what the Hosmer situation is, or playing center or playing a corner outfield position. So he kind of redeemed himself. He had some options, and maybe he would have just ended up trading Trey Turner, or they don't end up getting Jake Cronenworth and they keep Turner. There's a lot of things that could have happened there, but I think Preller kind of redeemed himself getting Tatis, and getting Cronenworth and Abrams. So I'm not going to bash him so much for that deal. And then Myers was an all-star at one point. I like that he embraced the San Diego community and signing a lot of autographs, and he's the one guy that's still there, longest tenured Padre. I really want to see him in a clubhouse, clinching a pennant, winning a World Series. So hopefully that can happen this year. I don't believe that they'll trade him, but that's a totally another debate, because he does have just one more year left on his deal. But so that is an honorable mention. Trading Trey Turner to the Nats, him doubling Myers' WAR in Washington compared to Myers in San Diego. That's the second honorable mention. The third I have is also in the 2014-15 offseason. Because obviously in hindsight, that offseason really sucked in terms of players they gave up and in terms of the success, or actually the inability to have success of that team that Preller's constructed. Good on Preller, by the way. He did blow it up quickly, so he didn't try to drag it out and prove that he was right. He admitted he was wrong. But again, third honorable mention, let's go to the Max Fried deal in Atlanta. He was traded to the Braves in the Justin Upton trade. Fried, Atlanta WAR with 3 more years of control. So this is not even like a Trey Turner thing where he had like 4 years in Washington and you count all the years up. He still has 3 more years of control in Atlanta, and he got injured. He dealt with a big injury. His WAR 11.3 so far with the Braves. Upton San Diego WAR, who's obviously he was the big player that came back in that San Diego deal with the Braves, 4.2. So Fried has almost tripled Upton's WAR that he had in San Diego. Obviously, Upton's stay was pretty short, and that trade obviously didn't work out. Just like pretty much all of those 14-15 offseason deals didn't work out. This trade was frustrating. I can't really blame Preller so much on the deal, but I'm kind of judging these trades in hindsight. Fried, he wasn't like a top prospect, if I remember correctly, like a Mackenzie Gore is, or a Patino, right? So I can't really bash him too much. And trading Upton, he was an all-star at one point with Atlanta. He was a great outfielder, but same thing with the Matt Kemp thing. The stay, the stay wasn't long. The tenure didn't work out, obviously. And so if you're judging it purely on what Fried has given the Braves and what Upton gave the Padres, it was a bad deal. It's as simple as that. And, having Fried right now would really, really help things. With them, you don't know the rotation, with injuries and all that. On paper, it looks great, just like it did last year. It looks even better on paper than it did going into last year because you have Gore improving mechanics. Maybe he's an option in the future. You have Morejon coming back. You have Mike Clevenger coming back. That's a big reason why it looks better than it did. You have obviously Snell and Darvish, hopefully better from injuries. Paddock, who knows with the UCL. You have Weathers coming back. Hopefully he's strong. You have a lot of options. Haven't even mentioned Musgrove. You have options, a lot of options, good paper options that you think would bounce back and have good years. So, and then just adding Fried, that would make the Padres rotation really, really solid, best in baseball, top to bottom in terms of depth and options. And so having him sucks not having him, sucks right now. So that is definitely one that Preller would take back in hindsight. And then the fourth honorable mention, before we get to the trade I would choose, is trading Franmil Reyes, fan favorite, if I can say that correctly, trading him to the Cleveland Indians in that 2019 trade deadline trade. And in return, in that 3-way deal, remember Bauer went to Cincinnati. Puig went to Cleveland along with Franmil. That was a 3-way deal. Taylor Trammell comes back to the Padres. He was a top prospect. That's an honorable mention. And I'm not going to base it, well, maybe I will a little bit, but I'm basing it on what Franmil has given Cleveland and what Trammell gave the Padres. And Trammell didn't give the Padres really anything. He struggled in the minor leagues, but it's more of, for me, the issue I had with that deal is if you're going to trade Franmil, a fan favorite, and there's been reports that kind of totally just popped the air in the balloon in the Padres clubhouse in 2019 because of how well he was liked and how much the fan base liked him. I liked the deal at the time, but because of what Franmil's given the Indians, he's hit 49 home runs there with Cleveland, more as a DH. And looking in hindsight, obviously, he could have been the DH in 2020. And the fact that Preller just gave up on Trammell, who was the best prospect in the Red system, one of the best outfield prospects in the league. He was winning MVP honors in the Futures game in Washington in that All-Star weekend, and just to flip him after not even a full minor league season. So it just didn't really make sense to flip him. And then for what what Franmil has given the Indians and how well he was liked, and kind of the fact that they haven't really found a great option to replace Franmil. Myers is still here, obviously. They have Grisham in center, but for Franmil in a corner outfield spot, Pham didn't really work out. Who knows if they bring him back on a one-year deal, but they didn't. It's not like they substituted Franmil for a Castellanos or a Bryant, for these last few years. They could end up doing that in the offseason, but having him as a DH option in 2020, I know that they didn't know that at the time. Having a well-liked guy in the clubhouse, nothing against Tommy Pham, but in hindsight, that deal just doesn't look great. And part of the reason, so that's an honorable mention. And part of the reason, as we get to the one deal I would undo, again, we're not counting free agent signings, one trade I would undo if I could pick one from Preller's tenure so far through February 7th, 2022, mid-lockout, is the Taylor Trammell flip to the Mariners in that Austin Nola deal. That is the deal I would pick if I could undo one trade. If I could undo that one trade, why that trade, right? You could bring up the Trey Turner trade, and I think some people would pick that. But like I mentioned, they did get Tatis, in a later deal, so that lessens the blow. Myers ended up being an all-star in a serviceable major league, right? And he's been here, longest tenured Padre, kind of been a fan favorite a little bit. So I'm not going to bash him totally for that because I think he's made up for it. But this deal with Trammell flipping him, I was not an advocate for just flipping him, not giving him a full minor league season, just giving up on one of the best outfield prospects in the game. And that's who he was. He was one of the best prospects in baseball. And I know you can make the argument, hey, look at Gore, one of the best prospects. Look at Mejia, right? Francisco Mejia in the Brad Hand deal. One of the best prospects in the league. He might turn into something, he might not. That's why they're a prospect. They're not a proven big leaguer. So part with the prospect, right, for what you're getting in return. But when Trammell, he was in Double-A with Amarillo, I think. He was close. I think you should have given him more time. He had the minor league alternate training site at the University of San Diego. They just didn't give him a full minor league season. They didn't let him get comfortable and work with the coaches for more than a full season. That kind of irked me. So flipping Andres Munoz. So before we get into that, let's do the full trade that I would undo. Padres acquire Austin Adams, Dan Altavilla, Austin Nola before the deadline in 2020 from the Mariners. In return, the Mariners received Trammell, Ty France, Luis Torrens, and Andres Munoz. That's the deal I would undo. Maybe that's my recency bias a little bit, but that's the deal I would undo. And we just got into flipping Trammell. For me, that didn't make sense. And he could turn into something. He could, he still has those, 5-6 years of major league control. And let's get off the Trammell thing, because when you include that, just flipping him, and you gave up Franmil the year before, it just makes it worse. But getting off that, just talking about Ty France and Andres Munoz and even Luis Torrens and comparing to what they got back, it's a complete dud. And, you know, I think Nola, obviously, he was the big factor in what they were getting back. I liked getting Nola in return at the time of the deal. He was hitting for average. He was staying healthy with the Mariners. He had versatility, but maybe like a lot of us, I think probably got caught up in, Manny Machado blocking Ty France, Hosmer blocking Ty France, and Nola hitting for average. And maybe he's a better hitting catcher than Hedges, right? Kind of got caught into that trap, and Mejia not really panning out. So I think I'll admit I kind of got caught into that trap. And looking back on it now, Luis Torrens, who they gave up, who was going to be a third string catcher right at the time, but he stayed healthy. Nola has not. Nola, since that deal, he's played in only 75 games with the Padres. He's battled thumb injuries, knee injuries. He has only 4 home runs in those 75 games, a 258 average compared to hitting close to 290 that he did with Seattle in his time with Seattle. While Torrens has stayed pretty healthy, he's not the starting catcher, but he stayed pretty healthy, playing in 126 games, so a little less than double the amount of games that Nola has played in, and he's hit 4 times the amount of home runs, not being the starting catcher. He's hit 16 home runs. So even that looks better than what Nola has done. And so that really hurts. That's an aspect that hurts. We can talk about Andres Munoz. Every aspect of the deal hurts. And that's why it's really the one I would undo, giving up Andres Munoz. I know that they got back Austin Adams with the slider, but he set the record for most hit batters in a single season last year. That hasn't really panned out great. He could bounce back, but who knows? Dan Altavilla has been nothing for the Padres. What is his WAR? His WAR for the Padres has been 0.1. Austin Adams is 0.2. Nola 1.2. So that their WAR combined with everything that Preller got back in that deal in 2020 is a whopping 1.5. Altavilla hasn't stayed healthy. Austin Adams, like I mentioned, hitting every third batter, it seems like. He's hit or miss. It just hasn't been a great deal. And then you factor in Andres Munoz that they could have kept. I know he had Tommy John, and they wouldn't have even gotten to use him last year, but he should be healthy coming into this year, I believe. And he could have been a closer opportunity. I mean, watching him in 2019, that guy was throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastballs, and it just seemed like that was a guy that it was like at the time of the deal, it was like, maybe you shouldn't have given him up. Maybe you could have given up someone else. I don't have names in front of me who options were, but maybe you could have given up someone else. Taylor Williams, I forget if that was the same trade or if it was a different trade. I'm not even factoring in him. I believe that was a different trade, but he hasn't really done anything either. He could amount to something, but every single aspect. And then the last aspect, obviously, is the slam dunk is just the nail in the coffin is Ty France. I mean, hometown guy, went to San Diego State. I know he was blocked by Manny, blocked by Hosmer, but boy, would he solve a lot of problems right now that the Padres have. Peter Seidler, Ron Fowler, the ownership, they're going to end up having to pay a lot of money probably if they wanted Chris Bryant or Nick Castellanos. They're going to have to pay a significant amount of money on a one-year deal if they want a Nelson Cruz or a Kyle Schwarber, because there's going to be a lot of competitors for that. So if you factor in both of those, if they get a DH, if they get like a Nelson Cruz, if they get like a Chris Bryant or Nick Castellanos, and let's say they pay, which isn't going to happen, it's going to be more, but let's just say $20 million a year plus $10 million a year for a DH. That's $30 million for each season on a DH and a power outfield hitting bat that they'd have to pay when all they have to do for Ty France is pay the rookie minimum, the minimum salary before he gets to arbitration. I don't even think he's at arbitration yet. And he could still produce at some sort of level that a DH could. Last year, his WAR was 4.5. And what hurts the most is, it was reported by Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic last year that weeks before the deadline, Preller even told Ty France that he was going to be a big part in the Padres' future 4 to 6 years, in the next 4 to 6 years. And that ended up not happening. And just the big thing with that, I mean, he had a 4.5 WAR last year. Seattle's returned, like I mentioned. Well, we'll get to that later. But France, the versatility, can play first base, can play third, second, he can DH, and that's a big thing. He could be a DH. He could play first, and you have Jake Cronenworth, who's an all-star for being at second base last year. He could stick at second, so you don't need Ha-Seong Kim, who's not great defensively, or excuse me, he's great defensively, not great offensively, but he looks yoked in pictures I've seen online, so we'll see if he can hit the ball and the power, can help his power numbers. But in terms of the versatility, that sucked, having him gone. And instead, now they pay $21 million to Jerks and Profar, $7 million a year. So that hurts. Just a lot of different aspects and a different snowball effects from this deal that really makes it one of the worst, or for me, the worst deal that Preller has made, the deal that I would undo in Preller's tenure if I had a chance. Like I mentioned, France with the 4.3 WAR, he was a huge factor in the Seattle Mariners almost making the playoffs last year. And if you were to tell me before last year that Ty France would have a 4.3 WAR and would help the Mariners almost make the postseason, it would almost be believable because of spurts of what you saw from Ty France and his versatility and the power that he had when he did play. He was just blocked. So at the time of that deal, I think I wasn't, too mad at giving away Ty France because he was blocked. But in terms of a bench bat, in terms of looking at it now, he could have finished as the DH in 2020, and he could have been a DH going into 2022, or play first base if they somehow miraculously, a team's dumb enough to take on some of Hosmer's contract, or somehow they just bench Hosmer and they put Ty France at first and they sign Nelson Cruz or something. A lot of different scenarios. It would really, really solve problems and a lot of help. It wouldn't be as much in terms of money-wise, to Peter Seidler. Giving up him really, really hurts, especially when you factor in that Nola has dealt with injuries. He hasn't done really anything. Austin Adams has a 0.2 WAR last year, hit 1 million people. Altavia has injuries. There's just been, and then giving up on Trammell early, giving up a 100-mile-an-hour reliever who could help and still on a rookie contract. Giving up just a lot of the aspects of the deal. Terrens as a backup catcher who stayed healthy. A lot of the aspects have hurt. San Diego's combined WAR since that deal for all of those players, 1.5. Or 2021, excuse me, I think. 2021. I think this is the full deal. 1.5 combined WAR of all the players that the Padres traded for in that Nola Trammell deal in 2020. Seattle's return, meanwhile, is 5.4. So that's just utterly ridiculous. Over 3 times the amount of production that they've gotten out of the return that they got from the Padres in that deal in such a short amount of time. I mean, we're talking a little bit like a season and a half. And you got to factor in the 2020 season wasn't even that long. It was 1 month that they got them in that deal. So that trade really, really, I think is, if not set the franchise back, and has really made the options less. They've had less options, and that deal is going to force, if they do go this route, it's going to force the Padres to pay a lot more money than they would have if they kept France. So, and if they didn't give up on Trammell, maybe he turns into something in the outfield. So that's who I would pick. There's been honorable mentions, like the Grand deal to the Dodgers deal, Turner to the Nats, Fried to the Braves, Franmil to Cleveland. But I picked Trammell, France, Munoz, and Terrens to the Mariners. Again, Jerry DePoto wins again. Trader Jerry, he wins again in that deal specifically. So I'd love to hear a discussion. Which one would you pick? Those aren't the only options. There are other options, but those were the big options that I did want to go over. What options would you pick? Let me know on YouTube in the comments. Let us know at Talking Friars on Twitter, Instagram. Love to hear your thoughts. And thank you so much for listening and watching. And I'll see you again later this week. Thank you so much. Ben Fadden signing off. Until next time, let's go Padres.